Hey, what's up, everybody? This is your boy Kenny, and this is my review of the Whitney documentary. I think it came out in June of this year, and definitely it not only talked about her life, but then it also talked about some hidden family secrets that we didn't know before. So it was a great documentary because it actually showed, her mother, her brothers, people that were in her inner circle that actually gave, thoughts and commentary on her life and also certain things that happened, throughout her career. But definitely I wanted to review this because those who know me, they know I'm a big diehard Whitney fan. As many of us are. I mean, I definitely gravitated towards Whitney. I remember watching MTV and seeing Whitney do her thing, and I definitely loved her career as an actress. I loved her as a personality, and it's just unfortunate that she's no longer with us, but she's left an impeccable legacy, and there will never be another Whitney Houston. And I go to say that this woman had a mega superstar career. I mean, she had the most successful debut in history. Her 2 albums are the 2 highest grossing albums in history. She has a record of 7 consecutive #1 hits. She pretty much eclipsed Elvis, for crying out loud. She has the #1 single of all time from I Will Always Love You. And then The Bodyguard was the highest grossing soundtrack of all time. So this woman was not only a groundbreaker, but then also she's the most awarded female artist of all time. So Beyonce, you got more work to do. So so Whitney Houston was like a pioneer in her own right. And she was a pioneer not only in her success, but also with the God-given gift that she gave her, and that she came from this great lineage of great singers. One being her mother. So definitely in this episode, why I say episode, forgive me, y'all. Definitely in this documentary, they open the documentary with her talking about, she feels that she's always running from this dark force, and it never gets her because she always outruns it. And her mother said that's her running from the devil, and the devil's always trying to come after her, but she always beats him. And she said that sometimes when she wakes out of bed, she feels as if she had been running. So that was very deep that they started the documentary off with that, because it really showed that she definitely had demons that were trying to take her down, but she was a determined woman, and she fought, and she fled, and she always was able to get away from the demons, but then yet the demons kept coming for her. And that's I see that as a possibility because she was so gifted, and that God really touched her with one of the golden voices of the 20th century. One of the best singers that ever lived, bar none. But also in this documentary, they talk about her being born in Newark, New Jersey during the riots of the 60s. And Whitney talks about, that it was so bad that she remembers, laying on the floor and eating off the floor, so they wouldn't get struck by any, ricochet bullets that were bouncing off all over the place. So she said, I grew up in the hood. I grew up in the ghetto. And then, she's the youngest of 3 children. She has her older brothers, Gary and Michael. And her and Michael were closer in age. So Michael talks about how they were like best friends, and his father said, protect her, make sure nothing happens to her, and if anything happens to her, don't you come home. So he let it be known that, you're responsible for your little sister. And he said that, yeah, she was very smart, she was sassy, and she was tough. He talked about how their mom would dress her up really nice, but then she come back all dirty with her hair messed up because she always wanted to be tough, and she always wanted to, wanted to prove herself. And it just goes to show you that's exactly how she was as a woman. She was a woman that was tough, and she was a fighter. And they definitely talk about their upbringing, with their mom, being a singer and, singing, backup for Aretha Franklin, Elvis Presley, and she was in demand, so she was always on the road. And Michael talks about he can remember him and Whitney sitting on the curb crying every time she left. And they were, and then John later on became her manager, so John would be going on tour with their mother, so that would lead them to be cared for by other family members, where certain things happen that I'm definitely going to get into, because definitely a deep family secret was revealed in this documentary. They even Sissy Houston also talks about being the minister of music at the New Hope Baptist Church, and that's where Whitney got her start in music. And she talks about that Whitney was a good girl. She everybody loved her except for the girls who were jealous of her, and they used to chase her home, but I was always there to meet them at the door, because I'm a fighter. You mess with my kid, you mess with me. So she would always be there to have Whitney's back, and I thought that was very awesome. And then another reason why she was bullied was because she was light skinned, and a lot of people in the neighborhood were dark skinned, so they attacked and teased her because she was lighter than them. And it just goes to colorism in the black community, and it all stems from white supremacy, that type of psychology. But then they talked about how Whitney Houston was actually named after an actress named Whitney Blake, who was on this sitcom in the 60s. But her brothers was like, we never called her Whitney, we called her Nippy. That was like the nickname that her dad gave her, so to everybody she was Nippy. And her former sister-in-law Donna Houston talked about that's how it was. Like, when she got on stage, she was Whitney Houston, but when she came off the stage, she was Nippy again. They were totally two separate personalities. And in the 70s, there was this man, Ken Gibson, who became the first black mayor in Newark, and Whitney's father, John Houston, was the head of central planning and zoning in his administration. In the administration was a corrupt administration, but you couldn't lay a brick to build a building anywhere in Newark without going through her father. So her father had this powerful role in the Gibson administration, and then with Sissy having a successful career as a background singer and a studio singer, they were able to make enough money to move the family to East Orange, New Jersey, on Dodge Street, and even though they lived in the suburbs, they had a pool and they had a nice house, but they were 20 blocks away from Newark. So even though they lived in the suburbs, the hood was literally right outside their doorstep. And they also talk about the lineage of singers that Whitney comes from. They talk about the Drinkers Singers, which was this gospel group where her mother was sung lead, and it was a group with her aunts and uncles. And they definitely are known within the gospel community. And another gem from the family was Dionne Warwick, who was her cousin, who had this big pop career, working with Burt Bacharach and Hal David. And then you also had Dee Dee Warwick, who was Dionne's younger sister, she is known as being one of the best soul voices of all time. A soulful singer, and she had a big voice, and definitely you can see some of the music qualities that Whitney had. She inherited that because she came from a musical family, and then of course her mother, Cissy Houston, tried to have a solo career but never got the backing that she should have received, because Whitney, I mean, if anybody could out-sing Whitney, was her mother. Because Sissy's voice, man, she can sing the rafters, off the building. I mean, Cissy Houston's voice, even now that she's old, she still has that powerhouse voice. Because when she, at the BET Awards, she did a tribute to Whitney, and it moved me to tears, because Cissy Houston just has that big voice, and we see that's where Whitney got the gift. And due to the fact that that solo career didn't happen for Cissy, she definitely put that drive into her daughter. And she talked about how she taught Whitney to sing the right way, and she knew how to sing in 3 different ways: from the abdomen, from the chest, and from the head. She learned all 3, and she said that's what I taught her, to sing from the heart, mind, and your guts. Meaning you need to feel what you're singing, and you need to sing from your heart and from your soul. And they also talked about that Cissy was very strict with Whitney because she knew what Whitney had. And Michael talks about that there were times they would come in the house and wouldn't speak to each other. Whitney be cursing and slamming doors, and pretty much Cissy was like, look, if you want to be a singer, this is what you got to do, and if you don't want to sing, let me know right now so I won't waste my time. So Cissy was harder on Whitney because she knew Whitney had the gift. And there was also a part of the documentary where Whitney was harmonizing to Dionne Warwick's theme from Valley of the Dolls, which is a beautiful song, and I love listening to Dionne Warwick sing the song, because it was a theme throughout the whole movie, but seeing Dionne Warwick perform it live and just seeing how beautiful and angelic her voice was, man, it's enough to bring tears to your eyes. And to hear Whitney harmonizing it, was just beautiful. And they talked about her parents putting her in a Catholic school to get her away from the bullying that she was going through in school. And and also they wanted her to be refined, they wanted her to be sophisticated, and they also wanted her to get a good education. And according to Aunt Bay, nothing bad happened in Whitney's childhood. She had an idyllic childhood. She had 2 parents that loved her, but then again, there were family secrets that were discussed in this documentary. One of them being what happened between, Joe and Cissy Houston, because here it is, even me, when Whitney was in her heyday, I thought her mother and father were together. Had no idea they divorced when she was in her teens. And the reason was because of infidelity, not just on his end, but her end as well. Because also I think I forgot the guy's name, but he's John's son, Whitney's half brother. He had talked about how his father was insanely jealous, and he would actually wiretap Cissy's phone conversations. And while doing that, I think that's where he found out that Cissy was having an affair with the minister of the church. And Whitney was devastated when all of that came out, and it really put her and her mom at odds. And Whitney actually moved out at 18, and she didn't even know where she moved to. But one thing that Gary said in this documentary is that the family has secrets, and when secrets aren't dealt with, they never go away. They also talked about her career modeling and how she hated modeling because she knew that she was going to be a singer. I mean, even when she got the role of Sandra on the Cosby Show, she pretty much said that she pretty much asked the producers of the show, would she be able to take time off of the show because she's going to have to tour. And they were like, well, we're going to be shooting, so we're not going to be able to do that. So she turned down the role to play Sandra because she knew she was going to be a singer, and that was her gift, and that was her goal. She knew. And it just goes to show you, man, like when God has a plan for your life, you just know. And here it is. She was, through her teen years, she actually was a part of. Sissy had this show that she would do at different nightclubs, and Whitney would sing background for her. And Whitney would get upset because there would be these teen sensations that were becoming big stars, and here it is. She knew she could sing them out the room, but she felt like her mother and her father were holding her back. Or one of the producers pretty much had told her that, what you see with these artists, with these young artists, is fad music. What your mother wants for you is legacy music. And that there's a difference, music that's going to last even beyond your years. And I can honestly say, Whitney, you succeeded in that, because your music will never die, and it's going to, create even more, young women who want to be in your likeness. So Whitney, you waiting was the right thing, because definitely they knew the genius that Whitney possessed. Well, at least Whitney did. And pretty much what was going on through those years is that Whitney was grooming her for superstardom. And they even talk about that time where Sissy tricked Whitney into doing the show, because Sissy calls like, oh, I can't do the show, I'm sick, I'm not feeling well, I'm gonna need you to do the show. And it was at this place called McHale's, which was this big R&B club in New York. And Whitney literally goes in there and does the show like her mother, but she blew the roof off of the place. And she there was thunderous applause, standing ovations. I mean, she killed it. And then she said the next day her mother called. She's like, hello. She's like, huh? Where were you? Like, what's going on? I thought you said you were sick. She's like, oh no, I just said that. I wanted to see if you were gonna meet up to the task and you were gonna do it. And she proved that she did. So she tested her daughter to see, was she ready to hold the stage on her own. And they talked about that they had two major offers, one from Elektra and one from Arista. And time and time they would come down to the club bringing flowers and bringing sentiments to try to get her to sign with them. And eventually they chose with Clive. One, because Clive had worked with Dion, and he also worked with Aretha Franklin. They were also on Arista at the time. So definitely, Clive was the better choice. And they said that even though Clive created the package, but the actual taste and the essence of Whitney got from Sissy. Pretty much what Clive Davis did is that he took that talent and he created an image and a package for it. But then also they talked about how, because her career was going to be geared to her being a pop artist and being pretty much, marketed towards the mainstream white audience, they talked about this whole thing about double consciousness, where here it is, she had to be this image, but then again, it kind of plays back to you wondering, like, is that really me, or is that just an extension of me? Because here it is, she couldn't be who she was. She had to be what the record company wanted her to be. She had to sell the image, this pretty, glamazon who had this beautiful voice and was just so sweet and innocent. Where we know that Whitney came from Newark, and Whitney definitely, she definitely was different. You know, she wasn't this glam queen. She liked being in sweatpants, and she liked, drinking beer and hanging out with the fellas, and you know, pretty much what we saw on television was what Arista created as far as her image. And then they also talk about, her first television appearance on the Merv Griffin show, where she sung Home. And I have to admit that after she had passed, for almost a good week, I was just in total shock and complete disbelief that Whitney Houston was gone, because I grew up loving her, being a huge fan. I mean, my mother will tell you, when Whitney came on TV, I literally ran to watch Whitney. I never wanted to miss Whitney in anything she did. So, and I remember that my friend at the time had called me and told me that she had passed. I remember for a good minute I just froze, because I couldn't believe it. And it took me about a week. But, one day I was on YouTube and I found this performance from the Merv Griffin show of her singing Home. And after I watched it, I just cried like a baby. Because it really hit me that, wow, we really lost a star. We truly lost a star. And definitely that was done in '83. So that was done 2 years, prior to her solo debut, the Whitney Houston album. But yeah, they talked about, how that album became the highest grossing, debut album of all time, because Whitney was a meganage. Nobody had ever seen anything like her. Normally it was all about having the big bands behind the singer, and that was the big draw. The big draw was her. Just her being flat-foot and could sing the roof off the place, and people were just mesmerized by her singing voice. But yet she came from this lineage of great singing. And here it is, she was put, in that zone, and Whitney excelled. I mean, there wasn't a place you could turn that you didn't find Whitney in the 80s. I mean, she ruled the 80s. I mean, she was the first African American female to be played on MTV, and her career just skyrocketed. But then they talked about that, privately, Whitney was very simple. She liked sleeping on the couch, making a pallet on the couch. She was just a very simple girl. They also talked about some of the men in her life. There was also rumored about her having an affair with Jermaine Jackson. She dated Eddie Murphy, Randall Cunningham, Robert De Niro. And then they also talked about this guy, Brad Johnson, who was an actual relationship that she had, during the early 80s of her career. And he even talked about, he never saw a dark moment with her. He saw that she was a beautiful girl. He said that she was an old soul, but still had that kiddie-ish way about her, because she was 23 when they were dating. And he even said that he even was cool with Robin, Robin being her best friend. He said that Robin was very protective, but he said that me and Robin got along fine. Well, they also talked about, Whitney at 16 gets a job working at a summer camp, and that's where she met Robin Crawford for the first time. Gary immediately said that Robin was a nobody, she was an opportunist, and there was something about her, and I didn't want my sister around her because it was evil and it was wicked. And it kind of came off very homophobic to me, and that was really probably one of the main reasons why they didn't want Robin around Whitney, because one, Robin was a lesbian. She was very outspoken. She knew who she was very assertive, and she was a very dominant person. And I think that's something that Whitney gravitated towards, because this was the one person that had her back. She would go to bat for her, and actually when she moved out of the family's house, she moved in with Robin. So the family kind of had issues with her because she was somebody that had influence over Whitney, and anybody that had influence was considered a threat in their opinion. But her Ellen LeVar, who was her hairstylist and close friend, she talked about that her relationship with Robin was her safety net. It was the type of relationship that she could have outside the public eye. She could be her authentic self with her, whereas the public relationships that she had with men were the relationships that everyone expected her to have, but also she loved men too. And they said that Whitney was what you would call in today's world someone who was sexually fluid. She loves and she floats where she goes, and it is what it is. I mean, but then they also talked about, once she became a star, how, they kind of put on that image of the perfect family, because people didn't even know that John and Sissy were divorced, but yet they were there together, putting that role of the perfect family, out there, as far as Whitney's image. And it was also known that John Huston didn't like Robin, and even thought of ways to get rid of Robin. But let's just say the things didn't work out. But then, but when Whitney first started off, she actually had her own management team. But later on, her father ended up becoming her manager and taking over the management altogether. And pretty much he was a civil servant working in New Jersey. And then all of a sudden, your daughter becomes a big superstar. He ended up getting power in a way that he never thought he could. He could call Hollywood executives for a meeting and they would respond. Having that type of access to power was just everything. And yet he went from making $500 a week as a civil servant to now making $500,000 a year, as her manager. And then once he took over, as, manager of her career, pretty much everybody in the family except Sissy Houston was on payroll. Now, that was a great thing because it gave her family opportunity. It gave them a means to work with her and to be, to pretty much be, a force around her where she had her family with her throughout her career. But then it also worked to her detriment, because a lot of decisions were made based off of money versus where certain decisions should have been based off of her well-being and her health and her sanctity. But a lot of that was compromised because of the money. And then they also talk about her brothers. And this I didn't know. I didn't know that Gary was actually a professional basketball player. He had got on he got into the NBA. He had got on the Denver Nuggets, but they ended up kicking him off the team because he failed a drug test. So from there, he went to singing backup for Whitney, and he talks about how it got to the point he was no longer a name anymore. He was just Whitney's big brother. And that had to be somewhat of a letdown, and that had to be demoralizing that here it is, you had this career as being an NBA star to now being backup to your sister. But, then again, he took it in stride. And Michael, her brother, became her road manager. So the both of them were pretty much there, and, her father pretty much told the both of them that your job is to make sure you protect Whitney and that you have her back and that you're with her every step of the way, making sure that Whitney's okay. So yeah, they were good as far as being protector of their sister, but yet also the dark side of it is that they all were dabbling in drugs. And Michael even talks about, because remember, it was on that segment with Oprah where he first came out and said that he was the one that got Whitney onto drugs, that the first time she tried cocaine, he was doing it with her. And he definitely got, some backlash about that, but he clarified that first of all, Whitney was a child, but so was he. He was only like maybe 2 years older than her. So they were doing this stuff together as kids, and they kind of grew up in what we would call like the drug culture. I mean, the 80s, drugs was everywhere. It was, hell, we even had a crack epidemic, for crying out loud. So drugs were accessible. And one of the close family friends says that, yeah, I gave her a bag of weed and I gave her a line of coke, for her 16th birthday. And even Gary even talks about that he was the one that would get drugs for them in every city or every state or anywhere they went. He even said he even got drug in Japan, which was a no-no. But Michael even talks about it, that drugs was done out in the open. He was saying that, I bet you probably interviewed people that I got high with. They know who they are. He was like, shoot, everybody was doing drugs. It was at the parties. It was at the get-togethers. It was at the meetings. Everybody was doing drugs. So no one knew that it was going to be a dangerous thing because it was a part of the culture. Everybody was getting high. But then we can definitely tell that drugs definitely did a number on Michael, because Michael's definitely still here, but you can definitely tell drugs definitely damaged him. And then they also showed this segment where Sissy Houston along with Whitney was talking about the music industry and how how there's so much pressure and how the fans are fickle. They always go for what's new. 1 week is one thing and the next week it'll be something else. And then Sissy went on to say that, yeah, that damn Janet Jackson, that bitch can't sing. And then Whitney was like, I think we need to edit this. And Robin was the one recording it. And, and Sissy was like, look, when you got talent, and Sissy was like, look, when you got talent and you got class, you don't have to change who you are. Why do I have to change when I know I'm great and I know that I have a talent? I don't have to change. And, Whitney was like, yeah, don't change, y'all. Don't change. And then Whitney was like, yeah, like that damn Paula Abdul. Paula Abdul ain't shit. Yeah, she ain't shit. Like, she's singing off-key on the record. And why? Because she has an image, which we all know ain't true. And it's funny because Tupac said the same thing about Paula Abdul in an interview, too. So I was like, wow. I like Paula, though. But I liked Whitney better, let's be real. But yeah, so they definitely talked about that, and then they also talked about the racial criticism that Whitney received, and pretty much what happened to her at the Soul Train Awards, where she was a nominee and she was booed when her name was mentioned. And also Al Sharpton was one of these people that was hitting the grounds calling her Whitey Houston. So, and it's messed up that we do this to each other as black people. That, being black is not something that she should have to try to be. Being black is who she is. Being black is who I am. Being black is who we all are who share this, melanin beautiful skin. You know what I'm saying? So, but it just goes to show how society is so screwed up. And here it is, Heather Locklear and James Ingram, I'm naming the nominees. Her name gets mentioned. There's boos. And if anything, this is the night that her and Bobby Brown connected for the first time, because here it is, Whitney got such this negative response from her own people, but yet they embraced Bobby Brown. And we see that Dionne Warwick introduced Bobby Brown, and the crowd was going crazy when Bobby was out there. And Bobby, in this interview, he talks about how, she kept nudging him in his head, and he was like, excuse me. She was like, what? And he's like, the way she said it, she kind of had like an attitude, and I was cocky as hell back then. I was very conceited, but we connected, and from that point on, they became an item. And, but everybody else was like, how can she be with this? She's this pop princess, and she's so sophisticated, and he's uncouth and unrefined. But people didn't realize that, look, Whitney was from the hood. He was from Roxbury, Massachusetts. The hood area in Boston. She was from Newark, New Jersey. So it was like a hood boy meets hood girl. And he was like, her brothers rolled into one person. So So therefore, definitely they became an item. They end up getting married, and then I think after that wedding, that was a time that was very difficult for Robin, because, and they talked about this in this segment too, that, when you really love somebody, you want the best for them, even if it's not the best for you. Because she never liked Bobby, and Bobby didn't care for her, and they were known to get into a lot of verbal, even physical battles, with each other. And, Robin was one of those people that really had Whitney's best interest at heart, and she was trying to protect her from all of the landmines around her. And, they talk about her giving birth to Bobby Christina, and Aunt Bay gets emotional when she talks about Bobby Chris, because she was kind of like Bobby Chris's caregiver for about 8 years. And, Michael even talked about that, Whitney didn't want to leave her daughter with family members. She wanted her daughter with her on the road. But he said that therefore, Bobby didn't grow up around other children. She grew up around adults, which means you grow up fast before your time. And we kind of seen that's what happened with Bobby Christina. And then they also said that, at first Whitney was a great mother. She was very attentive. But then her codependent relationship to Bobby and their drug use, they began to neglect their roles as parents. And they talked about that Bobby Chris was left to the wolves, and she never stood a chance. And they also talk about this iconic moment where Whitney Houston does the Star Spangled Banner. One of the things that she used as inspiration was Marvin Gaye's version of the Star Spangled Banner, where he kind of did it soulfully, and he kind of did it to like this beat machine. And I remember that was definitely groundbreaking. No one ever did the national anthem like that. And she said that she wanted to kind of create a moment like that for herself. But the guy who was the head of her band, he's definitely familiar too. Forgot his name. She's been with him for years. I mean, she even was working with him before she became famous. But he ended up becoming like her band manager, and he gave her the music, but she had never listened to it. And it wasn't until the day of she finally listened to it, and she says, "Okay." So he said that the moment that she opened her mouth was the first time he heard it with everybody else. And we all know how much of a memorable moment it was when she did the national anthem back at the Super Bowl back in 1992. And even to this day when I listen to it, because they even play this. If you go to the Smithsonian Museum here in Washington, D.C., the American History Museum, which is right across from the African American History Museum, there's a part where they talk about the Star Spangled Banner, and her voice, they have all these different people who sung the Star Spangled Banner, and they also have her voice singing the Star Spangled Banner. And I remember going through this exhibit and seeing people crying after coming out of it, listening to Whitney's version of the Star Spangled Banner. So even now, it's still powerful as it was then. So that was definitely a groundbreaking moment. And then from that point, it was The Bodyguard. And The Bodyguard, was definitely this interracial story. Originally, it was going to be Ryan O'Neal and Diana Ross that were going to be in the role. But, Kevin Costner, who was the executive producer of the movie, wanted Whitney. And he wanted Whitney because, one, she was beautiful. She was a great singer. It wasn't necessarily because she was black, but because she was the right person for their role. And he even waited, for Whitney to be available, because Whitney had went on tour. So he waited a year until she was available. And here it was, it was this interracial love story. And he said that, he did take note that Whitney was black. But he said that moment where she stops the plane and she runs out and gives him the kiss, she was every white actress that ran to kiss Cary Grant or went to, kiss, what's another one I was thinking of? Clark Gable, you have it, or Humphrey Bogart, she became any white actress in that moment where she ran to kiss her man, and it got to the point where there was no color after that. You just saw two people in love, and that they had a special love, and that even though they were parting ways, they were never going to forget each other. And they even said that movie even got a lot of that scene got a thunderous applause in South Africa when it premiered there. But that movie took Whitney Houston's career to the stratosphere. She was an icon after that. I mean, especially after the remake of Dolly Parton's song "I Will Always Love You." That definitely put her bar none. She was definitely one of the greatest artists, of that era. And and they also showed the clip from the concert that she did in Johannesburg. She actually was the first major artist to perform in a post-apartheid South Africa. She was very supportive of Nelson Mandela, and I remember that concert because I remember I watched it from beginning to end, and it was live, so it was like as if I was right there with her. And I remember just being mesmerized, and I remember taping it on VHS, and I remember just being glued the whole time. I did not move. I had my snacks and everything there, and I just watched it from beginning to end, and I was just mesmerized by her performance. And it was just beautiful. But then also, her version of "I Will Always Love You," Saddam Hussein did an Arabic version of the song for his last election campaign, and I was just cracking up. I was like, wow, she became a world figure after doing The Bodyguard, because "I Will Always Love You," that broke grounds in many parts of the world. So she became a world figure after The Bodyguard, to the point even Saddam Hussein even did "I Will Always Love You" as his signature song for his election. I thought that was pretty awesome. And then they also talked about how her rise began to affect her marriage to Bobby Brown, because at first, they were kind of like equilibriums. He was an artist, she was an artist. She was more mainstream than he was, but they both had. But then he was pretty much, he also had mainstream appeal too, but she just had more than he did. But then once she did The Bodyguard, that put her in a totally different area, and Bobby began to get all the backing in the press, calling him, Mr. Houston. And Bobby, I think, with all of his criminal history, it was a way of him lashing out to the fact that he was living under Whitney Houston's bubble, and he was no longer himself anymore. And they even Whitney, tried to, bring him up, by kind of putting herself down a little bit. Like, her production company, what at first was called Whitney Houston Productions, but then she changed it to Brown House Productions. And, pretty much her assistant, Mary Jones, said that there was a love between them, but it was a strange love, and it became a codependency, like a drug for the both of them, to even the point where even Bobby Crisp was even left out of it. And they also talk about the many times they've done drug interventions to help her, and but yet the reason why things were overlooked and why things weren't taken seriously is because a lot of people in the family were dependent on the Whitney Houston brand. A lot of them didn't have a skill set outside of being a part of her family. So some people just allowed things to happen because they wanted to keep their good jobs, they wanted to keep their money, and they wanted to keep their lifestyle. But then again, a lot of them was like, well, hey, she's doing this to herself, so why should I have to stop? And then they also talk about this whole thing with Robin, because little do people know, Robin was a major force in Whitney Houston's career. She was the one that would talk to the record company. She was the one that would get Whitney out of bed. She was the one that actually was helping to shape Whitney's image as far as videos and concerts and all of that. Robin was the go-to person. Everybody had to go to Robin to get to Whitney. But then that started to wane because of her friction that she had with Bobby Brown. And it got to the point where she thought that Bobby was a bad influence and that she will continue to fall as long as she stayed with him. So she pretty much gave her an ultimatum. It's either me or him. Whitney pretty much says, well, I gladly receive your resignation. And that thing happened around 99 is when Robin left, and they didn't speak to each other for years. And then after that, John had complete control, but then they talked about, there was a lot of misappropriations of funds and a lot of mismanagement, when it came down to Whitney's fortune. And pretty much Wendy, I think that's what caused the rift between Whitney and her father, because she trusted her father, and yet, there was one person said in this documentary, said that you kind of question things where the accountant has a Ferrari and a yacht and he only has one client. Something ain't right here. So, and Gary says that once she got wind that their father was stealing money, she cut him off, not just personally but also financially. So that's when he went after her and sued her for $100 million, because he helped set up this, supposedly he helped set up this new record deal, which was the highest record deal, of that time. She was offered $100 million, which was groundbreaking. And that's what he was suing her for. And I think that really broke Whitney to her core, because that was her dad. That was like her hero. And here it is, he's now suing her for money. And I remember when she talked about it in that Diane Sawyer interview, the infamous Quack is Whack interview, she got to the point where she talked about her father. She had to excuse herself because she became too emotional. And sadly, her father died before they could mend fences, because Whitney she was broken after that whole situation involving her and her father. And she didn't show up to the funeral. She actually did her personal goodbyes, and she just didn't want to be in the public eye in regards to that, because she definitely took the death of her father hard, and I don't think she ever really overcame that. And then they also talked about the infamous performance at the Michael Jackson anniversary special, where she looked very gaunt and very thin, and definitely that was definitely a talking piece during the Diane Sawyer interview as well. And then they see that after a while, she became like this running joke in the tabloids, on television and everything. Everybody was talking about cracked out Whitney. And Ella Reed was like, what, now Whitney's a joke to you guys? Now is she something to be made of? Now she's something to be made fun of? Well, fuck you. Because Whitney is one of the greatest voices that ever lived, that ever walked the face of this planet. And now you're going to make her tabloid fodder? Like they love to see you fall. And she also had a very, very close relationship with Michael Jackson. And they said that they would get a hotel room and they would just sit in the room and wouldn't even speak to each other. But they both understood what each one was going through, because the same thing was happening to Michael. It was also happening to her. And then they also talk about her whole history with drugs. And then they said that mostly someone's drug use usually stems from something that happened in childhood. And Gary actually opens up that, when he was like 9 or 10 years old, he was actually molested by a family member who was a female. And Pat Houston also seconded that, it also happened to Whitney as well. And also Mary, who was her assistant, pretty much talked to her about it, which actually I think probably did happen, because Whitney never wanted to leave Bobby alone, and Whitney had this very strong passion against child abuse. And Mary says that she pretty much said that I was molested as a child too, and she said that she cried, and she said she never told her mother about it. She just internalized it all, and you know, and they also reveal in this documentary that the person that molested her was her cousin Dee Dee Warwick, who is the sister of Dionne Warwick, and that was definitely shocking. And they even talked about it in People's Magazine that they were going to reveal that. And I think Dionne definitely came out against it, and some people don't believe it, but in all honesty, it's a strong possibility, because definitely, child abuse, incest, and those things, they happen a lot in families, and a lot of families don't talk about it. It's something that they sweep under the rug. And even to now, there's a lot of families that still battle with that, and it's something you don't talk about. And, I felt if she probably would have been able to talk about it with her mother and get past that hurt, things may have gotten better for her. Because, like, when you internalize things, it eats away at you. And I think that was one of the things that she was dealing with, as an individual. Outside of the glitz and the glam. I mean, she was a person that was vandalized. She was hurt. And, drugs becomes a way to escape that. And I think it also happened to Dee Dee as well, because Dee Dee also had problems with drug addiction, which led to her death. So I think that both of them, I think Dee Dee was also abused as a child as well. And, and you kind of see those traits. And then they definitely talked about, towards, the time she started to do the, her comeback album, the thing is, because the album did go number one, in this debut, and it was great that Whitney had this new album out. It had some great music on it. I Look to You, $1 Million Bill. But they all said that they did not think it would be wise for her to go on tour because she was having all of these vocal problems. But she needed the money because of her lifestyle, she was going broke. And, the money had dried up. And she needed this flow of money. So she went on tour, and it received a lot of bad reviews because her voice wasn't up to par to sing some of the songs that we've known of her, from the beginning of her career, like I Will Always Love You and some of her earlier hits. She couldn't even, the voice wasn't there. And then they talked about the last movie she did, Sparkle, and that, Sparkle was a really good time for her because she really loved the cast. She got along with everybody. She became somewhat of a mother figure on that set. And they said that when she first started, she looked very bloated and she really didn't look like herself. And then after a while, she came to herself and she blew everybody away. And then they also, talk about her death at the Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles. And, then it's funny because, the day I said that I got emotional was when I saw her first appearance on the Merv Griffin show. They actually showed that about her going home, but they were adding it that she went home to be with the Lord. And they showed that in retrospect to showing her funeral at New Hope Baptist Church. So this was a really good documentary, and it definitely goes to show that if you are being abused or you're being hurt by someone, tell somebody. Don't hold it in. Don't try to protect the person, and you did nothing wrong. You can't control a predator, because a predator preys on innocent children, and this is an epidemic that we need to stop, especially within the Black community. So, my message to all of you, that if you are in this situation like this, tell somebody, and tell somebody now. So that's my review for this documentary. It was great. I'm a true Whitney Houston fan, and she will never be forgotten, and her legacy will live forever. So subscribe to my channel. Click that bell to get notifications every time I drop a video. Also follow me on all of my social platforms. I have them all listed in the description box. Also like this video, comment on this video, and share this video. And I'll definitely be back with another documentary down the line. So definitely be on the lookout for another documentary from your boy Kenneth Stallings from KRS TV. So until next time, everybody, take care.